Bill Walsh Diversity Fellowship has 5 HBCU coaches involved, but of the bunch, Eddie George will benefit the most. Oh yeah, it's Locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked on HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked on HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. I actually just wrote an article that dropped yesterday about Shaq Davis and Mark Evans, our HBCU prospects, who are now with the Saints. So make sure you check that out at Saints Wire. Today's episode, however, is going to be about some prospects at the end, discussing Bryant Shaun Doss's performance at the NBA G League Elite Camp. Before that, we're going to discuss some coaches and their movement to the next level, possibly, because there were 5 HBCU coaches who were invited and are now going to be a part of the Bill Walsh Diversity Fellowship. And I believe that Eddie George of the bunch is going to be the one that benefits from this the most. I think he's going to be the one who needs this the most. And I hope that he's the one who takes the most from his days or weeks that he spends with an NFL team during training camp. So essentially, what the Bill Walsh Diversity Fellowship is specifically for coaches from a diverse background, right? So minorities and things of that nature. But it's essentially a boot camp, a training camp for coaches at training camp for the NFL team. So it can range from a couple of days, a couple of weeks. In certain situations, it can even, if things go really well, you can say, you know what? We want to bring you, Coach Gray, throughout the rest of the year. We're just going to ride with you and have you come with us through the whole season. Now, obviously, that won't be the case for Coach George, right? I would highly doubt it. Now, maybe things just go so great and so pleasantly that he's like, you know what, I'm going to leave Tennessee State, because that's what he would have to do. He's not just going to take a year off, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Nevertheless, I believe that he's the person who will benefit from this the most, because let's just take a little bit of a look through Eddie George's athletic career, or just his career as far as we know it. So he retired from being a professional athlete in 2004 at the age of 31. Let's just say he was playing sports for 25 years. Let's just say he started at 6, right? So he was an athlete for 25 years. After that, football's done. He's not worried about the game. He has financial endeavors. He's doing Broadway acting on stage. And then in 2021, 17 years after he said, I'm done with the game of football, he's now the Tennessee State head coach. In between there, he's not thinking about the game. A 17-year hiatus from the game altogether, doesn't think about coaching at all. I can't help but believe that the struggles in his first 2 years of Tennessee State have to do with the fact that you have an absolute novice here. You have a coach who was a former player, but has absolutely no experience being a coach. A lot of people try to compare that to Deion Sanders. That's not what happened with Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders had coaching experience. He just didn't have the coaching experience that could get him to where he wanted to go. He coached his high school or his son's high school team. He was a coach there for years. I remember when I was in Little League 15 years ago. He was coaching there nearly 15 years ago, right? He was coaching then. And I know it's like Little League, we're going to scoff at that. Okay, that's fine. Scoff at it. I understand it's not real experience. That's why he couldn't go to Colorado off the jump. But here's the thing. He at least had something that he can fall back on, some sort of comfort, some sort of, I've done this before and it worked with somebody. Eddie George has none of that. Eddie George never once, in my knowledge, right? He wasn't a high school coach. He might have coached his kid's Little League team or something. I don't know. But you're looking at a guy who has absolutely no experience to my knowledge. Am I supposed to think that that's not going to take effect on him now that he steps into the collegiate game? Am I supposed to think that the fact that they've been struggling doesn't have some sort of call back to the fact that he'd never done this before? Why would we expect him to just be good at it? Because he's a former player? No. He's not going to be a good coach just because he's a former player. A lot of people translate knowing the game as a player to meaning you can coach it. That's not the case. It isn't. Sometimes you know things, you just can't explain it. That's just the truth of the matter. So I think that this is going to benefit him because this is a person who has been learning on the fly, has been learning on the job for 2 years now. The man doesn't have any bases. However, he can go to training camp. He's with the Bears, so he doesn't have to worry, he doesn't have to be as familiar as he would have been if he was with the Titans, and I'll get to that in a second. Or he wouldn't have been as familiar as he would have been had he went to the Titans, and I'll get to that in a second. But overall, this is somebody who needs to be around an NFL program, learn how they coach. See, he's been singing on stage longer than he's been acting, longer than he's been standing on the sideline. His sideline experience is being a player, being coached, not coaching. It's a completely different thing, and now maybe he'll get a boot camp, and maybe you'll see certain things that he can go in and implement because he's a head coach. So he has the power to say, I'm implementing this right now, and this is how we're going to do it at Tennessee State going forward, more so than any of the other candidates. And the reason I'm glad that he didn't go to Tennessee is because I'm sure that he's been to Tennessee Titan camp recently. You know, at least since Mike Vrabel has been the coach. And Mike Vrabel is a fantastic coach. I really do like him as a coach. However, you're going as a student, not a bystander. I want you to go somewhere where you've never been a bystander. I highly doubt he's ever went to Chicago Bears camp, because why would he? Why would he? He's a Titan through and through, except for that 1 year that we don't mention where he was in the Lone Star State. Again, where he kind of started his career, and now he ended his career, right? So he went to Dallas his last year. But if you've been there, you've been familiar, right? I don't want you standing over there talking to Derrick Henry or any of that. Right? Because you're a student, you're here to learn. And I know that sounds so remedial. It just sounds like, why would you be talking about a grown man like this, like you can't compartmentalize? I don't want him to have to. Allow him to go to Chicago, where he has very few, if any, ties, and allow him to just soak up the information that Eberflus is giving out. I think this was a great landing spot for him. And I also believe that this is a great opportunity for him to finally get some coaching on his ability to coach, something he probably needed before he even got this job in the first place. But what about the other four? I say that Eddie George is going to bring the most benefit. However, he does not have the highest ceiling when it comes to benefiting from this fellowship. That belongs to the other four men who are in this group. As we continue with Locked on HBCU, we'll dive into that. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs, and Bird Dogs are extremely comfortable. I told you I slept in them one time, woke up, was like, oh no, these are not pajamas, these are shorts. But are we really sure that they're not pajamas? Are we really sure? Because they feel that comfortable. And I've been walking around the house all day and night in these the next day after. You know, don't believe me, ask your moms. She'll tell you. I ain't gonna look. I'm not gonna lie to you, but you know she not gonna lie to you. So go ahead and ask her what Darian, the mouth of the South Gray, has been walking around the house all day. And it's them Bird Dogs. And they're great because, listen, you get a spill on them, easy to brush off, it's nothing. They got a liner on the inside, so it's almost like I could go swimming if I wanted to. I haven't tried them out, but I'm almost certain that I could, right? I can go outside, I can barbecue in them, I can just go run some errands in them, I can just chill in the house and watch Netflix with them if I wanted to. They're that multi-purposeful. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and look for yourself. See what piques your interest. But make sure you use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege and get yourself a free tumbler, something to drink out of as you're wearing your new favorite shorts. And as we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day every day. On tomorrow's episode, we'll be diving into the teams around the HBCU landscape who are using the transfer portal more than anybody else. But right now, let's discuss not quite a transfer portal, but still an opportunity for new beginnings. And that's these other coaches who are in the Bill Walsh Diversity Fellowship alongside Eddie George. And I believe that they truly have a higher ceiling than George when it comes to this fellowship. So the players are Lindsey Lamar out of Howard, Arthur Ray out of Howard. Shout out to Howard for having 2 people on this list. 2 of the 5 come from Howard. Actually, 3 of the 5 come from the MEAC as well, as you have Antone Sewell, who is from Morgan State, formerly of Bowie State. And then you have Chris Scott Jr. from Grambling. So first and foremost, like I said, I think the ceiling is extremely high and even higher for these players, for these coaches. Now, I know what you might be thinking. How can I sit here and say the ceiling is higher, but I think that Eddie George is going to benefit more? And that's because I have more faith in how Eddie George is going to benefit. See, Coach George, he has the power. He's a head coach already. So when he takes all the information in, he can go implement it. Meanwhile, as an OC, you can implement it kind of, but you can't change a culture. You can't change how you operate completely as a team. Maybe you can change your quarterbacks or you can change your offensive line if you're an O-line coach. But Eddie George being the head coach means that if he takes in, oh, this is how they run their practices. This is how Tennessee State is going to run their practices. If Coach Sewell sees, oh, this is how they run their practices, he can't go to Morgan State and say, this is how we're running our practices. He can go ask and suggest it to Coach Wilson, but he can't just demand it. So that's why I think that, and plus they all have coaching experience. Meanwhile, this is a much needed training camp for the former player turned coach in Coach George. So that's why I think he benefits the most. However, we're talking about just straight ceiling and how much you can benefit. Give me these 4, because I don't see Eddie George being an NFL coach based off of the connections that he makes in this. George probably isn't making any connections that he couldn't have already made if he wanted to. I'm not sure if he even wants to go be an NFL coach. He might be perfectly happy at Tennessee State. I just don't see him. I don't know how much he loves it right now. I don't. You got to remember, he didn't want to do this at all. At all. They just threw this at his lap, and he wasn't even going to do it. His wife convinced him to do it. These are important things to remember. You don't go from your wife convincing you to even try being a coach to desiring being an NFL coach in 2 years. I don't know. Maybe if they win an OVC championship or something, that championship will ignite him and say, you know what? I do want to be a coach. Who knows? But right now, you're looking at him as he's already said, I'm a delegator. I put it to here. I tell everybody, this is what I need you to do. This is what I need you to do. I don't know if that's the type of coach from this fellowship that benefits the most. As far as making it to the NFL, I should say. Because that's the goal of this fellowship. Not just because, oh, I want HBCU representation. No, the goal is to get the representation of more minorities within the NFL. That's the thing, right? So you have to make sure that you remember exactly what the fellowship is meant to do. And I feel like those other guys fit more within the mold than Coach George does. That's why I don't feel like this is a contradiction of either one of those points. Now, when you look at the players, or excuse me, the coaches, you have Lindsey Lamar, once again, offensive coordinator and wide receiver coach for Howard. You have Arthur Ray, Howard offensive line coach. You have Antone Sewell, Morgan State's assistant head coach and defensive coordinator. And then you have Chris Scott Jr., who is Grambling State's special teams coach. Now, the one I'm the most excited about is Coach Lamar, because Lindsey Lamar is an offensive coordinator. Now, I could have said the same thing about Coach Ray, but I decided not to. The reason I didn't is because offensive coordinator is significantly higher on the desired list when it comes to head coaching options than offensive line. I think this is important. I am not saying any of these guys are going to be head coaches. We're not jumping the gun. However, the NFL likes what the NFL likes, and the NFL knows that the NFL likes what they want to like. And right now, it's really hot to be an offensive coach. Right now, it's very popular for you to be an offensive coach and move your way up the ladder. And why wouldn't we want coaches who have the ability to move up the ladder? See, too often, we set our own ceiling, right? We set our own ceiling. Man, this dude's just an offensive coordinator at Howard. Why are you talking to me and a head coach? Because what if that's what he wants to do one day? I was thinking about this today. And maybe I'm going off the deep end, but you know what? I don't care. I'm going to do it right now. I was thinking about this today. At what age did we go from pumping up every single dream to shutting down every single dream? At what age did that happen? Because I was just thinking about it. As a kid, think about 7, 8 years old. Oh, you want to be a basketball player? You want to be a football player? You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. But by the time you get to high school, it's only like 2% that really make it. When did we shift? When did we go from no longer encouraging people to try to achieve something to now telling them every single reason why they won't achieve it? I'll tell you a little bit of a story on that before I end this little tangent of sorts. Today, I'm a substitute teacher. I was going to the bathroom, and this kid asked me if I play sports. Don't mind the fact that that's a crazy question. But I told him, I said, I think he asked if I play basketball specifically. I said, no, sir, I'm 5'9.5". I ain't playing no basketball. Let's just be real. You know it. I know it. I'm 5'9.5". The Lord ain't blessed me with height, so I wasn't going to play basketball. Told him I was too short. He said, no such thing as too short. Wow. 5th grade. What innocence. No, I'm completely too short, but I love the attitude. At what point did we go from, nah, you not? Or excuse me, no, you can still achieve this, that, and the third no matter what, to, yeah, this just ain't going to work for you. It's not just realistic thinking. It's shutting down dreams. See, me being 5'9" and knowing I'm not going to play basketball because I don't have the hops to play basketball at 5'9.5", that's realistic thinking. But telling somebody that's 6'2" that they can't play in the league because people don't really make it to the NBA, different conversation. That's a tangent. But I'm glad I had it here because it was a thought that was on my brain and somehow I stumbled into it. However, I'm super happy for Lindsey Lamar because overall he is an offensive coordinator, and offensive minds are the type of guys who tend to kind of jump up the ladder. So if I can get him into this fellowship, and NFL suggested to the NFL teams, hey, pick in some offensive guys because they know that's the type of people who make it up to being a head coach, and ultimately that's what they're looking to increase even more, minority head coaches, not just minorities within the coaching staff. Now, going forward, we're going to switch gears. I appreciate that tangent. I hope you did too. Going forward, we're going to switch gears, and we're going to discuss Bryant Shaun Doss's performance at the NBA G League Elite Camp. No, they didn't make it to the NFL draft, the NBA draft combine, but they showed some flashes that could lead to some other opportunities, and we'll describe those as we continue with Locked on HBCU. And as we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3 and through the tangent. Matter of fact, I thank you 3 times for that. Thank you. All right, I really do appreciate it. I guess that's 4, so forget it, 4 times. But for this topic around Bryant Shaun Doss's performance at the NBA G League Elite Camp, we're going to use some stats from an SI article written by friend of the show, Mason Smith. The HBCU Legends is the HBCU athletic division of Sports Illustrated's coverage. So we're going to use some stats from the article that he wrote, and I did retweet this on my Twitter at South Exclusives. So make sure that you guys tune into that or check out that if you want to read it just in general. But it's important to remember that the ultimate goal when you come to this camp is the NBA draft combine, right? You're trying to earn that invite, but not everybody gets it. Not many people get it, right? It's not like just not everybody, but not many people get it. There's a very select few people who get that opportunity. Shaun Doss and Bryant were not one of those very select few. However, that doesn't mean it's over. It doesn't mean, I didn't make it. Time for me to be done. Might as well find another route now, or another place to play basketball, or go find myself a 9-to-5. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that at all. Your hopes at the NBA aren't done. They haven't been dashed. Now, we're just going to be honest. Bryant and Shaun Doss likely aren't being drafted. That's what this tells me. They likely aren't being drafted. However, there's still multiple routes they can go, and they showed enough flashes to where those routes probably will still be available to them. I'll say that, right? So let's look at the flashing and testing. And you look at Bryant, who had the 4th fastest shuttle, which to me showcases his lateral speed for defense with the ball in his hands, and it shows his ability just to move side to side, right? And that's just athletic prowess. It's just ability to move. That's what you need. You need to be able to move, right? And then you look at Shaun Doss, who, as somebody who has a love for his wingspan, yeah, it don't fit in the camera, 6'3", 5'9.5". Remember that, 6'3", baby. Anywho, that was for my boy Mike and AJ. But overall, I have a lot of value in my wingspan. So when I see somebody who has a pretty lengthy wingspan himself, which is something that Shaun Doss does have, got to acknowledge that. He stands under 6'4", had a 6'10" wingspan. That is the second highest or second longest wingspan of any player at the combine who wasn't 6'4". So pretty good. That measures up. But outside of just testing, outside of just saying, oh, yeah, he shuttled fast or he has long arms, what else happened? Because we got to play some basketball, right? You got to play basketball at the end of the day. Well, it didn't start off pretty. Definitely didn't start off pretty. And it was at that point I knew they weren't going to make the combine, right? Because you can't just have as bad of a game as they did in the first game. But they did pick it up. They did pick it up. Let me not just go on this topic of them poorly too long. But Doss, he wasn't even really active in the first game he played. In the first game that he played, he had a board, he had a turnover, and he had an assist. That's his stat line. A rebound, a turnover, an assist. Didn't even attempt a shot. So it was zeros across the board, but he did have himself a board, a rebound, and an assist. Or a rebound, a turnover, and assist. Then as far as Bryant, he had 2 points, 2 fouls, and 2 turnovers. So not great starts for either one of these guys. Just overall, it just wasn't a great start. But yeah, the next time. In the next game that they played, they both started. In the first game, they came off the bench. And the minutes weren't too much different. But overall, they did come off the bench. So now in game 2, Doss got 2 steals, showing off the long arms. This is something he did really well in the SWAC. So this is something you wanted to see. You don't want players to go out there and be somebody they're not. Unless they were just being held back by their team that they were with, you want them to go showcase exactly who you saw on film. Maybe a little bit of excelling, but overall, you want them to be the guy you saw them to be on film. And on film, Shaun Doss was a good pickpocket. That's what he did well. Now he comes into game 2, gets 2 steals, so that's what we wanted. Now you look at Joe Bryant. Joe Bryant picked it up. He went to 8 points. So this was just improvement. Neither one of them blew the house away. Neither one of them did this. But overall, they did have better performances than they did originally in the first game. And when you look at Bryson Gresham last year from Texas Southern, when you look at Kyle Foster last year from Howard, when you look at MJ Randolph last year from FAMU, those were the 3 participants who were in this game. Last year, Randolph got an invitation to a G League training camp. He didn't get drafted by the G League, but he got invited to a training camp. And you look at Gresham and Foster, they got invited in the Summer League. So there are options out there. Neither one of those guys got selected to the NBA Draft Combine after their camp performance. So it's not like it's the end-all, be-all. You can still get to a Summer League. You can still get into a G League training camp, maybe even be selected by the G League. There's so many routes that I don't want Dawson Bryant to feel like this is not even just Dawson Bryant. When you just picking on what you think they're going to do, don't just think it's over. These are other routes, and I think they flashed enough with some of their testing, maybe some of their second game performances, and then also just looking at Bryant being who Bryant has been. He was the Reese's MVP of the All-Star game. Let's remember that. Just because he didn't do it all at the training camp doesn't all of a sudden mean all of those other things he did suddenly disappears. And hopefully you don't disappear either when it comes time for tomorrow, because I really do hope, fingers crossed, that you continue to make us your first listen of the day every day, because I do appreciate it. On tomorrow's episode, we'll be discussing which teams have been the most active in a transfer portal. And we're only talking about bringing in players. We're not talking about losing players, but just how many or which teams have been the best or most active in bringing in